At my son's wedding, his bride looked me straight in the eye and said, "You shouldn't be here." Her words were soft, but they cut through the laughter and music like broken glass. I stood frozen for a heartbeat, the scent of roses and champagne swirling around me. The photographer's flash went off nearby, capturing the exact moment my dignity slipped into silence. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just smiled and turned toward the exit. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and tell me where you're watching from, so I'll know how far my story has traveled." I had always imagined this day would be beautiful. The church bells, the music, the sight of my son standing tall in his black tuxedo, it was everything a mother dreams of. For weeks, I'd helped plan this wedding down to the smallest detail. I'd written checks, signed contracts, and negotiated with florists and caterers. Every napkin folded, every candle lit, every inch of satin on her gown. My hands had helped make it happen. I arrived at the Westbrook Hall ballroom early that morning, wearing the lavender dress my late husband once said brought out the color in my eyes. I pinned the small silver brooch he'd given me on our 40th anniversary to my chest, hoping it would bring me comfort. The hall glowed with soft gold light, the air heavy with the perfume of lilies and roses. Everything shimmered with joy, or at least it should have. The first uneasy feeling came when I noticed my seat card. It wasn't at the family table near the couple. It was at the very back of the room, near the kitchen doors, next to a stack of folded chairs. At first, I thought it was an innocent mistake. Maybe the planner had mixed things up. But when I glanced toward the head table, I saw my spot, empty, waiting. My name tag turned face down, as if it were an afterthought. People began to pour in, laughing, hugging, kissing. I smiled at each of them, holding on to my composure like a fragile glass ornament. Then she appeared. The bride. Radiant in her lace gown, veil trailing like a cloud behind her, she walked straight to me, that practiced smile never faltering. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said sweetly, "thank you for everything you've done, but please don't cause any scenes today. This is our day." Our day. My throat went dry. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but she was already turning away, greeting guests as if she hadn't just banished me from my own son's wedding. I looked for my son, Ethan, but he was surrounded by groomsmen, laughing, his hand resting proudly on her back. He didn't notice me standing alone. Or maybe he did, and chose not to. I sat quietly through the ceremony, my hands folded in my lap, pretending not to see the sideways glances from her family. When it ended, I followed the crowd to the reception hall, keeping my head high. No one needed to know that I'd been told to leave. Not yet. As the music began, I stood near the doorway, watching the first dance. Ethan looked happy, truly happy, and for a moment, I convinced myself it was enough. But when the bride's mother took the microphone to toast, she said, "To my daughter, who planned this entire wedding from start to finish, you've outdone yourself, darling." Applause erupted. Glasses clinked. And I realized that every trace of my help, every payment, every signature had been erased. The laughter around me blurred. The chandelier lights seemed too bright, too cruel. I stepped outside onto the balcony, needing air. The cold wind brushed my face, carrying the sound of a violin from inside. I could still hear the bride's voice echoing in my head. "You shouldn't be here." Maybe she was right. Maybe I shouldn't. I looked down at the courtyard where the catering vans were parked. My phone buzzed with a payment reminder, the final balance for the venue, due that afternoon. My name on every invoice, every transfer. My heart slowed, steadying into something new. Calm, cold, certain. Inside, they were cutting the cake I'd paid for, toasting with champagne I'd ordered, dancing to the band I'd booked. And for the first time that day, I smiled. Not the polite, wounded smile I'd worn all evening, but something quieter, more deliberate. If they wanted me gone, they were about to see what gone really looked like. The next morning, the sky over Westbrook was pale and quiet, the kind of morning that usually follows a storm. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The lavender dress I'd worn still hung by the door, the faint scent of roses clinging to the fabric. My phone buzzed with unread messages, photos from relatives, congratulations from people who hadn't noticed my absence. I didn't open any of them. The house felt heavier than usual. My husband's armchair sat by the window, a soft dent in the cushion where he used to read the paper. He would have known what to say. He always did. I could almost hear him whispering, "Don't let them take your dignity, Alice." I ran my fingers over the stack of invoices spread out on the table. The florist, the band, the photographer, the venue, every receipt had my name printed in neat black letters. My heart thudded as I stared at the total. I wasn't angry. Not yet. It was something quieter. A still kind of disbelief that made the walls seem to hum. I picked up my phone and dialed the bank. The woman on the other end sounded cheerful, unaware that my voice was shaking. "Yes," I said. "I'd like to cancel a few scheduled transfers." My tone was polite, almost casual. She confirmed each payment one by one, her fingers clacking softly against the keyboard. "Yes, that's correct," I said when she asked for confirmation. "All of them." By noon, I'd made a few more calls. To the caterer, the venue manager, the decorator. I didn't raise my voice once. I simply explained that due to unforeseen circumstances, payment authorization was withdrawn. The responses came fast. Confusion, panic, apology. I told them I'd handle it all in person next week. When I hung up, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. In the afternoon, I drove past Westbrook Hall. The parking lot was nearly empty now, the banners from last night drooping in the rain. The staff carried boxes of leftover cake and flowers to the dumpsters. A few petals stuck to the wet pavement. I parked for a moment and watched. The building that had glowed with music and laughter last night now stood silent, gray, and lifeless. Inside my car, the radio played softly. An old song my husband used to hum while cooking breakfast. For a brief second, the melody filled the empty space in my chest. I whispered to the memory of him, "You'd have been proud of me." That evening, my son called. His number flashed across the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it ring. But habit won. I answered. "Mom," he said quickly, his voice tight. "The venue called me. They said something about payments being reversed. What's going on?" I took a slow breath. "I'm not sure," I said calmly. "Maybe you should talk to your wife about that. She told me I shouldn't be there, remember?" There was silence on the other end. I could hear faint chatter in the background. Voices. Maybe the brides, maybe guests still lingering. Then he sighed. "She didn't mean it like that." "I see," I replied. The words were steady, stripped of emotion. "Well, you'll need to handle the bills now. Everything's under your name as of this morning." He started to say something, then stopped. I imagined him standing there, surrounded by the mess of his own celebration, realizing for the first time how much of it had depended on me. "Mom, you can't just—" "I can," I said quietly, and I already did. When the call ended, I set the phone down beside my cold coffee. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long gold shadows across the kitchen floor. I walked to the window and watched as the light faded over the garden. The roses I'd planted years ago were blooming again, stubborn and bright against the dark soil. I thought about the way the bride had looked at me, so sure of herself, so certain that I no longer mattered. I wondered if she was still wearing that same smug smile now that the bills had started coming in. A faint chuckle escaped me, unplanned, almost soundless. I didn't hate her, not really. Hatred would have meant she still had power over me. What I felt was something simpler, relief, the kind that comes when you finally stop begging to be seen. Later that night, I opened the small box where I kept old photos. There was one of Ethan at age 10, standing in front of the Christmas tree, missing a tooth, grinning from ear to ear. Next to him, my husband held his shoulder, both of them wearing matching red sweaters. I traced my finger over their smiles. They looked so proud, so close. I whispered, "Somewhere along the way, we lost that, didn't we?" The clock ticked softly on the wall. The world outside was silent, except for the sound of distant traffic. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the faint glow from the hallway. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. The house was still, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt mine. Tomorrow, I would visit the bank again to finalize the cancellations. I'd send letters confirming the transfers were revoked, every document neat and official. Then I'd take a walk through the park, maybe stop by the bakery my husband used to love. The wedding had ended. The noise, the music, the fake smiles, they were gone. What remained was quiet, and in that quiet, I found something better than revenge. Peace. 2 days later, the phone began ringing again. Different numbers, different names. The florist wanted to confirm if the remaining balance would be processed soon. The venue manager left a message asking for clarification. The catering company said the newlyweds were refusing to pay, insisting everything had been settled. I didn't answer at first. I just let the phone ring, its sharp tone slicing through the stillness of my living room. When it finally stopped, I exhaled slowly. The silence that followed was comforting, proof that I was no longer running after anyone's approval. By afternoon, I walked to the mailbox. The air smelled faintly of rain and lilac. Among the usual letters, I found one addressed in familiar handwriting, Ethan's. Inside, there was no greeting, no warmth, just a single line written in hurried pen strokes, "We need to talk." I smiled faintly and placed the note on the table beside the cold coffee mug from earlier that morning. The day had been long, quiet, ordinary, until his car pulled up outside my house. I watched through the lace curtain as he stepped out, still in his work clothes, face drawn tight with frustration. When I opened the door, he didn't wait to be invited in. "Mom, this is serious," he said, voice raised slightly. "They're saying you canceled everything. Do you realize what kind of mess you've caused?" His words hit me like cold rain, but I stayed still. "I didn't cause it," I said softly. "I just stopped paying for it." He rubbed his forehead. "Pam, my wife, is humiliated. The hall called in front of everyone. The bill was announced at the end of the reception. They said payment had been withdrawn. Do you know how that looked?" I looked him straight in the eyes. I imagine it looked honest. He blinked, unsure how to respond. "You could have just talked to me instead of embarrassing us." "I tried," I said. "Many times. You just stopped listening." He shifted, hands on his hips, exhaling hard. "You don't understand, Mom. She didn't mean what she said that night. She was nervous. Weddings are stressful." My hands rested on the edge of the table. "Ethan, I've been a wife. I've been a mother. I know what stress looks like. What she said wasn't stress. It was truth slipping out." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, he looked like the boy I used to raise, the one who'd once cried when he accidentally broke my favorite vase. Now, that softness was gone, buried under years of someone else's influence. "Mom," he finally said, quieter, "people are talking. They think you did this to make a scene." I almost laughed. "A scene? I was told to leave my son's wedding. The only scene I made was silence." He sighed again, running a hand through his hair. "She's upset. Her family's furious. They said you embarrassed them in front of everyone." "I see," I said, my voice steady. "They should be grateful I didn't show up with the receipts." For the first time since he'd walked in, he fell completely silent. He knew I wasn't bluffing. Every document, every check, every email trail, my name was on them. He looked down, shoulders sagging. "I didn't know you paid for all of it." "I know," I said. "That's the problem." The words hung between us, heavy and final. He glanced around the house as if searching for something to hold onto, some reminder of the mother who'd once fixed his scraped knees and packed his school lunches. But the air had changed. I had changed. After a long silence, he said, "So what now?" "Now," I replied, "you start paying for your own life." He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. I'll figure it out." He turned toward the door, but before he left, he looked back. "You really hurt her, you know." "I didn't hurt her," I said calmly. "I just showed her what happens when you bite the hand that builds your dreams." When the door closed, the quiet returned, wrapping around me like an old familiar blanket. I walked to the kitchen window and watched his car disappear down the street. A bird landed on the fence, chirping softly, unbothered by human drama. That night, I lit a single candle and sat at the dining table. The lavender wax melted slowly, sending a soft scent through the room. It reminded me of peace, of my husband's voice, of laughter that used to fill this home. I thought of Ethan and his bride, sitting in their new apartment, calculating bills and trying to understand the weight of responsibility. Maybe someday they'd learn that love and respect can't be bought or taken for granted. I didn't wish them harm. I didn't wish them happiness either. I just wished them truth. When the candle burned low, I blew it out and whispered to the quiet room, "You shouldn't be here," echoing her words with a faint smile. But this time, it wasn't pain. It was freedom. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. The house smelled faintly of coffee and wet earth. I moved slowly through the quiet rooms, the same rooms I'd cleaned, decorated, and held together for decades. It felt different now, lighter somehow, as if every secret I'd carried for years had been washed out with last night's storm. I sat by the window and watched the street. Across the way, Mrs. Miller was walking her dog, umbrella in one hand, leash in the other. She waved, but I didn't wave back. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. Not after the calls, the shouting, the guilt my son tried to pass on to me. After a while, I opened the drawer of the old oak desk in the corner. Inside were letters, birthday cards, thank you notes, and a few photographs from the years before Meadow came into the picture. One photo caught my attention. It was of Ethan at 20, standing beside me on the porch, holding a hammer. We'd just finished repainting the fence together. His smile was wide, open, real. I traced his face with my finger, trying to remember when that light started fading. I thought about the years after his father died. How I sold our second car to help him through college. How I worked extra shifts at the library so he could buy his first suit. How proud I felt when he got engaged. How his fiancée called me Mom and baked me cookies the first time she visited. I believed her warmth was real. I believed she loved him for who he was, not what he could offer. Then came the small things. The changes that crept in quietly, like frost spreading overnight. She started speaking for him, deciding what he'd eat, what he'd wear, which friends he should keep. When I asked about Sunday dinners, she'd smile and say, "We're a little busy this weekend, maybe next time." But next time never came. I remembered the first Christmas after their engagement. I'd spent 3 days baking. Apple pies, pecan tarts, the chocolate cake Ethan loved since he was 10. When they finally arrived, they brought their own dessert, a fancy box of macarons from some French bakery. She placed it right in the center of the table, covering the cake I'd made. "Just a little something modern," she said sweetly. I laughed then, pretending it didn't sting. That was the start. Each holiday, each gathering, a little more of me was pushed aside. A smaller seat, a quieter voice, fewer visits, shorter hugs. I told myself it was normal, that life changes. But the truth was simpler. They were building a world that didn't include me. I thought of the night before the wedding, when she called to confirm the final payments. Her tone was syrupy. "You're such a blessing, Mrs. Whitmore. I don't know what we'd do without you." I remember smiling as I hung up, proud to help, proud to be needed. Now, those words echoed in my head, twisted and hollow. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. I stood, stretched my back, and made another cup of coffee. The sound of the kettle filled the silence. On the counter sat a small envelope I hadn't noticed before, probably slipped under the door while I was asleep. I picked it up. No return address. Inside was a thank you card with gold letters that read, "For your generosity." The signature at the bottom was hers. I laughed. A quiet, humorless sound. The handwriting was perfect. The message short. "We appreciate all you've done. Please understand this was never personal." Never personal. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I placed the card in the trash, pressing it down beneath a few coffee grounds until the gold letters disappeared. The afternoon drifted by slowly. The rain stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds and cast a soft glow across the dining room table, the same table I once imagined we'd gather around as a family. I brushed my hand over its surface, remembering the dinners, the birthdays, the laughter that used to fill this house. Every scratch in the wood had a story. Every mark, a memory. I took a notebook from the drawer and began to write, not to them, but for myself. I wrote about the wedding, about the look on her face, about how silence can sometimes be the loudest form of dignity. My handwriting trembled at first, then steadied. I wrote until the sun slipped behind the trees. As evening settled, the phone rang again. This time it was Ruth, my sister. "Alice, I saw the photos," she said gently. "You weren't in any of them." "I know," I replied. "I was never meant to be." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Are you all right?" I looked around the room. The soft light, the calm, the steady hum of the refrigerator. For the first time in a long time, yes. After we hung up, I walked to the front porch. The air was cool, the streetlights flickering on one by one. Across the road, the Millers' windows glowed warm with family chatter. I didn't feel envy. I just felt peaceful. I sat on the steps, wrapped my shawl around my shoulders, and watched the world move on. Somewhere out there, Ethan and his bride were facing a reality they hadn't planned for. The bills, the calls, the questions. Maybe for the first time, they were learning that actions have consequences. The night deepened, stars beginning to appear. I whispered into the quiet, more to myself than to anyone else, "You shouldn't be here." Only this time, it wasn't her voice echoing in my mind. It was mine. My own strength, finally loud enough to drown out the rest. I closed my eyes and let the wind carry the words away. For once, I didn't need to be part of their story. I was writing my own. 3 days passed before anyone came to see me again. The rain had stopped, the garden was brighter, and the air smelled of wet soil and lilac. I was trimming the hedges when I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel. A small silver sedan parked at the curb. The door opened and a young woman stepped out, holding a paper bag in her hands. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she called gently. Her voice was hesitant, careful. I straightened my back and nodded. "Yes?" "I'm Claire," she said. "I work for the florist. I came to pick up a payment receipt, but, well, your son told me to talk to you directly." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked too young to be carrying anyone else's mistakes. Her eyes darted toward the house, then back to me. I could tell she already knew something wasn't right. "Come in," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and polish. I'd spent the morning cleaning, not because I expected guests, but because order made me feel calm. She placed the bag on the table. "These were left at the shop," she explained. "The wedding flowers. Some of them didn't get used." I opened the bag. Inside were white lilies, their petals bruised but still fragrant. I lifted one and smiled faintly. "They were beautiful," I said. Claire hesitated. "It must have been a hard day." "It was," I replied simply, "but sometimes hard days clear the air." She nodded slowly, studying me with quiet curiosity. "My mom went through something similar," she said softly. "After my dad passed, people stopped inviting her to family events, said she made everyone uncomfortable. She just started over." Something in her words warmed me. It wasn't pity, it was understanding. "Your mother sounds like a strong woman," I said. "She is," Claire replied. "She always says peace isn't given, it's chosen." I smiled. "She's right." She looked relieved, like she'd been holding her breath since she arrived. "If you ever need help with flowers or anything really, you can call me." When she left, I stood by the door for a long time, watching her car disappear down the street. The lilies still rested on the table, their scent filling the quiet. For the first time in days, I didn't feel completely alone. Later that afternoon, I went to the park. It was the same park where Ethan used to ride his bike when he was little, the same bench where his father and I used to sit and watch the ducks. The trees were beginning to turn golden, the air cool but gentle. As I sat there, a boy ran past me chasing a red kite, his grandmother laughing behind him. The sight made me smile. Life had a way of circling back, even after everything fell apart. When I returned home, I found an envelope slipped under the door again. This time, it wasn't from the bride. The handwriting was Ethan's. "Mom, I know things went wrong. I shouldn't have let her speak to you that way. I don't know how to fix it yet, but I want to try. Can we talk?" For a long moment, I just stood there, reading the words over and over. They were simple, but they carried something real. Guilt, maybe, or growth. I made tea and sat at the table with his note beside me. The evening light poured through the window, soft and golden. I thought about calling him, but instead, I picked up a pen. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote, "Dear Ethan, I'm not angry anymore. I was hurt. Yes, but mostly disappointed. Not in you, but in how easily you let someone else decide how much space your mother was allowed to take. I don't need an apology. I just need you to remember who you were before you forgot where you came from." I paused, staring at the page. Then I added, "You're always welcome here, but respect must walk through the door with you." I folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it by the door for tomorrow's mail. That night, I lit a single candle again and set the lilies in a vase on the counter. Their petals had begun to open, soft and white against the dim kitchen light. I poured myself a small glass of wine and turned on the old radio. A slow song played, something from the 70s that used to fill our living room on Sunday mornings. I closed my eyes and let the melody settle into the silence. I thought of Claire, her kind eyes, her mother's words. Peace isn't given, it's chosen. Maybe she was right. Maybe peace wasn't about forgiving them or even being forgiven. Maybe it was about standing still in your own home and knowing you survived the storm without losing yourself. When the song ended, I looked at the lilies one more time and whispered to the quiet room, I choose peace. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain through the open window. The world was still turning, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be invited back in. I was already home. The morning mail arrived with a soft thud on the porch. I walked out in my slippers, the air cool against my face. Among the bills and flyers was a small envelope stamped with my son's handwriting. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the edges. Mom, it began. Thank you for your letter. I read it more times than I'll admit. I've been thinking about everything. The wedding, what was said, what wasn't. I was wrong to stay silent. I'll come by on Sunday if that's okay. I read the note twice, then folded it neatly and placed it beside the vase of lilies. The flowers were wilting now, their fragrance fading into something faint but still sweet. It felt fitting somehow, beautiful even in the process of ending. Sunday came quietly. The sky was pale blue, the kind that promises calm but carries a chill underneath. I spent the morning tidying the house, not for show, but because I wanted to greet him with order, not resentment. I set 2 cups on the kitchen table, brewed tea, and waited. At exactly noon, a car pulled into the driveway. I saw his shadow through the window before he knocked. For a moment, I hesitated, my hand resting on the doorknob. Then I opened it. Ethan stood there, looking older than I remembered. The confidence he wore at the wedding was gone, replaced by something softer, uncertainty, maybe regret. Hi, Mom, he said quietly. Hi, Ethan, I replied. He stepped inside, glancing around the house like he was searching for the past. The same family photos lined the walls, but the air between us felt new. He sat down at the table, wrapping his hands around the cup I'd poured for him. I didn't come to argue, he said. I just wanted to see you. That's good, I answered. Seeing is a start. For a while, we just sat there, the ticking clock filling the silence. Then he sighed, eyes downcast. Pam's been struggling. Her parents are furious about the bills. The vendors keep calling. I don't know how to fix all of it. I nodded, not to mock him, but because I understood. That's what happens when you build something on someone else's kindness without gratitude, I said gently. He looked up. I guess I didn't realize how much you did for us. No, I said softly. You realized it too late. His eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. He took a deep breath. Pam wanted to come, but I told her she should wait. She's ashamed. I tilted my head. Ashamed because the truth finally showed? He didn't answer. I didn't need him to. The silence spoke enough. After a moment, he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small box on the table. Dad's watch, he said. You gave it to me years ago. I think it belongs here again. The silver glinted under the light. I ran my thumb along the glass face, the familiar scratches where my husband had bumped it against the counter while cooking. For a moment, it felt like the years folded in on themselves, the distance shrinking. Thank you, I whispered. I don't know how to make things right, he said quietly. By being better than yesterday, I replied. He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that comes from understanding, not agreement. Do you think we can start over? We can start different, I said. Not the same, but honest. He smiled faintly, and for a brief second, I saw that boy again, the one with scraped knees and hopeful eyes. After he left, I stayed at the table, the watch resting in my palm. The ticking was soft but steady, a sound that filled the quiet without demanding attention. That evening, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and rose. I passed the miller's house, the park bench, the bakery where my husband and I used to buy apple turnovers. Everything looked ordinary, but it felt different now, like I was seeing it for the first time. When I returned home, the answering machine light blinked. A message from Claire. Just checking in, her voice said warmly. We have some extra tulips if you'd like them. I smiled. Maybe tomorrow, I murmured to the empty room. Before bed, I stood by the window. The night air was cool, carrying the faint hum of crickets. I thought of my husband, of Ethan. of how life bends and reshapes itself long after you think it's over. I whispered into the dark, "You'd be proud of me, Noel." I didn't break. The house was silent, but I felt something lift, like a weight that had finally learned how to rest. I turned off the light and let the room fade into shadows. The lilies on the counter leaned toward the candle's last flicker, petals curling inwards. They'd given everything they had, and still, they were beautiful. I walked upstairs, one slow step at a time. The watch ticked softly in my hand. It wasn't forgiveness I carried, it was peace earned, piece by piece. The next week slipped by quietly. The days blended into one another, each one softer than the last. I spent most mornings in the garden, trimming the roses, sweeping fallen leaves into small piles. The air smelled of earth and new beginnings. I no longer checked my phone for messages. The silence felt like company. On Wednesday, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door to find Claire again, holding a bundle of fresh tulips. "I brought these before they wilt," she said with that shy smile of hers. "They didn't sell at the shop, and I thought you might like them." I let her in, grateful for the warmth she carried. She arranged the flowers in a vase while I poured us tea. The house filled with color, soft pinks, yellows, and white, and for a moment it didn't feel empty anymore. "I heard from your son," Claire said quietly, stirring her tea. "He came to the shop with his wife yesterday. She looked nervous." I looked up. "Did she say anything?" "She asked if the bill could be split into installments," Claire replied. Then she apologized, to me, to the staff. She said she's been learning humility lately. I nodded, letting the words settle. "Humility is expensive," I said softly, "but it's worth every cent." Claire smiled faintly. She didn't look proud, just tired. "She will be fine," I said. "People like her always land on their feet, even if they lose the high heels along the way." We both laughed quietly, a gentle kind of laughter that didn't come from mockery, but from understanding. When she left, the house didn't feel quite as lonely. I kept the tulips near the window, their petals catching the sunlight. That evening, Ethan called again. His voice was steadier this time. "Mom, we're figuring things out," he said. "Pam wants to talk to you when you're ready." I thought for a long moment before answering. "Tell her I'm not angry," I said. "But tell her I'm not waiting either." He didn't argue. "I understand," he said quietly. After the call, I sat by the window, watching the dusk spread across the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, 7 slow chimes that melted into the wind. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The air smelled of tulips and rain. The next morning, I woke early and walked to the market. The bakery owner recognized me instantly. "Haven't seen you in a while, Mrs. Whitmore," he said cheerfully. "Your usual?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "1 apple turnover." The pastry was warm, flaky, dusted with sugar. I ate it slowly on a bench outside, the same kind I used to share with my husband on lazy Sunday mornings. The world moved around me, people laughing, cars honking, a baby crying somewhere down the street, but none of it touched the quiet place inside me anymore. When I got home, I noticed a small box on the porch. No name, no card. Inside was a framed photo, Ethan as a boy, standing beside me, holding the kite his father helped him build. Behind it was a short note in the bride's handwriting. "I'm sorry for how I treated you. You deserved better. Thank you for raising the man I love." I stared at the photo for a long time. Her words weren't redemption, but they were human. I placed the frame on the mantel beside my husband's picture. 2 sides of the same story, finally at peace. That night, as the clock ticked softly, I poured myself another cup of tea and lit the candle again. The tulips had begun to open wider, their petals stretching toward the flame. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the silence, the quiet revenge that had changed everything. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was balance. Sometimes strength doesn't roar, it just sits quietly and refuses to crumble. I took a slow sip of tea, the warmth steadying me. My reflection in the window looked older but not defeated. My hands, though lined and trembling, still belonged to a woman who had built and rebuilt her world without anyone's permission. Before going to bed, I opened the back door and stepped into the cool night. The garden shimmered under the moonlight. The air was still except for the sound of leaves rustling. I whispered to the darkness, "You shouldn't be here." But this time, the words were not meant for anyone else. They were for every bit of doubt that had ever made me small. The wind carried them away. I turned back toward the house, the warm glow spilling from the windows. It wasn't grand. It wasn't full, but it was mine, and for the first time in years, that was enough. A week later, the phone rang again. I almost didn't answer, but the number looked familiar. It was the venue manager from Westbrook Hall. His voice was polite, cautious. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began, "I wanted to let you know everything with the wedding balance has been settled. Your son came by this morning. He handled it himself." For a moment, I didn't say anything. My hand rested lightly on the receiver. "Thank you," I said finally. "That's good to hear." When I hung up, the silence in the house felt different, cleaner somehow. Like a room that had been closed for too long, finally let in some light. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out over the garden. The tulips Claire had brought were fading now, but new buds were already breaking through the soil. Life was moving forward, whether anyone asked it to or not. Later that afternoon, I put on my coat and walked into town. The bakery was busy, the scent of fresh bread spilling onto the street. I ordered 2 apple turnovers this time and carried one in a paper bag as I crossed to the small cafe across from the park. Claire was sitting by the window, reading. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "I thought you might like some company," I said, sliding the bag toward her. "You read my mind," she said. "How's the peace project going?" I laughed softly. "It's getting easier to maintain." We talked about small things, the weather, her job, the flowers in bloom. For the first time in a long while, the conversation didn't circle back to pain. It just existed, light and simple, like the hum of a radio left on low. When I left the cafe, I stopped by the post office. In my bag was a small envelope addressed to Ethan. Inside was the photograph he'd sent me back, the one of him as a boy, smiling beside me with the kite. I'd written on the back in neat cursive, "Keep this. Remember who you were when love was simple." That evening, as dusk settled over the house, I stood by the front door and looked at the porch. Someone had left a small bouquet wrapped in newspaper. White daisies this time. There was a note tucked inside. From Claire. "Because everyone deserves fresh flowers after a storm." I smiled, carried them inside, and replaced the tulips in the vase. The house smelled clean again. The phone rang once more just as I was setting the daisies on the counter. This time, it was Ethan's voice. "Mom," he said quietly, "Pam's expecting. She wanted me to tell you first." The words landed softly, not as a shock, but as something inevitable. "Congratulations," I said. "She wants to make things right," he continued. "She says she'd like you to be part of the baby's life." I didn't answer immediately. I thought of the wedding, the humiliation, the long silence that followed. Then I looked at the daisies, bright and unassuming, and felt something inside me loosen. "I'll think about it," I said simply. "When the time comes, we'll see." He hesitated. "I understand." After he hung up, I sat down at the kitchen table. The air felt still, calm. I ran a finger along the rim of my teacup and thought of how strange it was, the way endings sometimes folded into beginnings when you least expected them. The clock ticked softly in the background. I thought of my husband again, of how proud he would have been to see me sitting here, not defeated, just still, surviving, choosing. I stood and walked to the back door, stepping into the evening air. The sun had almost set, the horizon streaked in orange and pink. The garden glimmered in the fading light, every petal catching a hint of gold. I whispered to the sky, "You see, Noelle?" I didn't let them break me. A single bird lifted from the fence, wings slicing through the quiet. I watched it until it disappeared. When I returned inside, I turned off the lights and let the house nest in the soft glow of twilight. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need forgiveness either. All I needed was the sound of peace, the faint hum of life continuing, steady and calm, after the storm had passed. I sat down, folded my hands, and breathed in the scent of daisies. Sometimes the best revenge is simply surviving beautifully. A few weeks passed, and spring began to unfold in full color. The garden bloomed faster than I could tend it. The air carried the smell of fresh soil and sunlight, and each morning, birds sang like they were announcing something new. I started keeping the windows open again, letting the breeze move freely through the house. One morning, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, neat, careful, almost too practiced. It was from Pam. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. "Mrs. Whitmore," it began. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I've been thinking about what I said at the wedding and how I treated you. I was scared of being compared, scared of not being enough. I see now that I was cruel. I hurt you, and I hurt Ethan too. I'm sorry." The words were simple, almost fragile. I read them twice, then folded the paper and set it aside. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger, just a quiet understanding that sometimes people only learn kindness after life has humbled them. That afternoon, Ethan called again. His voice was lighter this time. "She wrote to you, didn't she?" he asked. "She did," I replied. "Mom," he said softly, "she really means it. Things have been different. She's calmer. She's even started volunteering at the library." I smiled faintly. "That's good. The library could use another set of hands." He hesitated. "We were wondering if you'd like to come to dinner this weekend. Just the three of us. No crowd, no speeches, just dinner." I didn't answer right away. The idea of walking into their home again, the same home where I'd once felt unwanted, made something in me tighten. But then I looked around the kitchen, the daisies still standing proud, the clock ticking steadily, and I realized I wasn't the same woman who had walked out of that wedding. "All right," I said finally. "I'll come." When Saturday arrived, I wore a soft blue dress and pinned my husband's old brooch to my collar. The drive to their house was quiet. The trees along the road were heavy with blossoms, petals drifting like snow across the windshield. When I parked, I sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing deeply. Pam opened the door before I could knock. Her face looked different, less painted, less proud. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, "thank you for coming." "Please," I said. "Call me Alice." Inside, the table was set simply. No crystal, no centerpiece, no excess. Just a warm meal and the faint sound of jazz playing low from the radio. Ethan hugged me tightly, and for the first time in months, it felt like a real hug, not one made out of duty. Dinner was quiet at first. We talked about small things. The weather, the baby, how the garden was growing. Pam kept glancing at me, like she was waiting for permission to breathe. Finally, she said, "I've been thinking a lot about that day. I wish I could take it back." "You can't," I said gently, "but you can move forward." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I don't know why I treated you like that. I guess I felt threatened." "I never wanted to take your place," I said. "I just wanted to keep my son." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was honest. Real. Ethan reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "Mom, I'm sorry too, for everything." "I know," I said. "You're learning." After dinner, Pam brought out a small box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, engraved with the words, "Thank you for raising him." She looked nervous as she handed it to me. "It's not enough," she said, "but it's from both of us." I turned the bracelet over in my hand, the metal cool against my skin. For the first time since that awful day, the tension in my chest began to ease. "Thank you," I said simply. When I left that night, the air outside was cool and sweet. The porch light glowed softly behind me, and I could hear Ethan and Pam talking quietly inside. No shouting, no bitterness, just two people learning to be better. I drove home with the windows down, the wind lifting my hair. The town lights shimmered in the distance. For years, I had carried the weight of being invisible, of being taken for granted. But as I turned onto my street, I realized something had shifted. I didn't need their apology to feel whole. I had built my peace long before they offered it. When I walked into the house, the clock struck 10. The candle on the counter had burned low, the flame flickering gently. I set the bracelet beside the vase of daisies and smiled. Sometimes, redemption doesn't arrive in grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it comes quietly, wrapped in humility, long after you've stopped expecting it. I whispered into the stillness, "Maybe this is enough." And for once, it truly was. Sunday morning came bright and clear. The sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, painting soft patterns on the kitchen floor. I sat with my tea, the bracelet from Pam glinting faintly on my wrist. It felt light, not because it erased what had happened, but because it reminded me that even broken things can shine again. I looked around the house and realized how quiet it had become. Not empty, just calm. Every corner carried memories, but none of them hurt anymore. The wedding, the humiliation, the betrayal, they were no longer wounds, only lessons written into time. By mid-morning, I put on my jacket and went outside. The air was cool, the sky wide and forgiving. I walked down to the park, the same path I used to take with Ethan when he was small. The trees were full of green now, their branches heavy with new life. Children laughed in the distance. A couple walked hand in hand along the pond, their reflections rippling in the water. I sat on a bench beneath the old oak tree and let the sound of the world fill the silence that used to belong to my grief. I remembered sitting here years ago with my husband, sharing coffee from a thermos, his arm around my shoulder. I could almost hear his voice now, gentle and steady. "You did what you had to do, Alice. You stood up for yourself." I closed my eyes and whispered, "I did." A soft breeze passed through the park, lifting the loose strands of my hair. For the first time in months, I felt light. Not victorious, not vindicated, just free. When I returned home, there was another letter waiting by the door. No return address, only my name written neatly in blue ink. Inside was a photo of a sonogram, and beneath it, a note from Pam. "It's a girl. We hope she'll have your strength." I held the paper between my hands for a long time, staring at the tiny outline of new life. My chest tightened, but it wasn't pain. It was something softer, something like pride. I placed the photo next to my husband's picture on the mantel and smiled. That evening, Ethan called. His voice was steady but tender. "Mom, we're naming her Grace," he said. "Grace," I repeated, tasting the word slowly. "That's a good name. The world could use more of it." "She'll need you," he said quietly. "We both will." "We'll see," I said, though my voice carried no resistance. "When the time is right." After we hung up, I stood by the window, watching the sky fade from gold to blue. The garden below glowed in the twilight. The daisies had closed for the night, their petals tucked neatly together like folded hands. I smiled, knowing they would open again in the morning. I poured myself another cup of tea and carried it to the porch. The wooden boards creaked softly beneath my feet. The air smelled of rain and growing things. I took a slow sip, feeling the warmth spread through me. It struck me how much life had changed since that day at the wedding. How I had gone from being dismissed and forgotten to standing on my own ground again. I didn't shout, I didn't fight. I just refused to be small. And that quiet defiance had rebuilt my world piece by piece. The porch light flickered as the wind picked up. Somewhere down the street, someone was playing an old tune on a harmonica. It drifted through the air, low and sweet, blending with the sound of the crickets. I thought of the young woman I once was, the wife, the mother, the dreamer. I thought of how much she'd given away, how much she'd endured, and I thought of the woman I had become, still standing, still gentle, but no longer waiting for anyone's approval. I whispered to the empty night, "I'm still here." A single tear slipped down my cheek, not from sadness, but from release. I wiped it away and laughed softly to myself. Tomorrow would bring something new, a visit perhaps, or another letter, or maybe just another quiet morning filled with sunlight and tea. Whatever came next, I was ready. Before going inside, I looked up at the stars, scattered and endless above the roofline. "You see, Noel?" I said. I kept my promise. I stayed strong. The wind rustled the trees as if answering back. I closed the door behind me and turned off the porch light. The house felt alive again, filled not with ghosts, but with gratitude. I placed the bracelet carefully on the mantel beside the sonogram photo and whispered one last time, "Grace." It was more than a name. It was what life had finally given back to me. The weeks that followed felt like chapters quietly closing themselves. The air grew warmer, the garden fuller, the sound of the wind through the tulips softer than before. I began each morning with tea on the porch, watching sunlight slide across the fence. Life no longer felt like something I was waiting to fix. It simply unfolded, one calm breath at a time. One morning, the phone rang. It was Ethan. "Mom," he said, "she's here. Grace was born last night." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words felt heavy with everything they carried. History, healing, hope. "How is she?" I managed. "She's perfect," he said softly. "Pam's resting. We're both exhausted, but we wanted you to know first." The line went quiet for a moment before I asked, "Does she have your eyes?" He laughed faintly. "Maybe. I think she has yours." After the call, I stood by the window for a long time, staring at the garden that had carried me through every season of loss and renewal. I whispered her name to the glass. Grace. It filled the air like a prayer. The next day, I visited the hospital. The halls smelled of disinfectant and fresh linen. My shoes echoed softly on the polished floor as I followed the signs toward maternity. When I reached the door, Ethan was waiting, tired but smiling. He hugged me without hesitation. "Come meet her," he said. Inside, the room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the faint cooing of a newborn. Pam lay in bed, her face pale but peaceful. When our eyes met, there was no pride, no pretense, only humility. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she lifted the baby gently and nodded for me to come closer. I stepped forward, my hands trembling. The baby's tiny fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. She was so small, so impossibly new, her skin soft as rose petals. When Pam placed her in my arms, something inside me broke open, the kind of breaking that heals. "She's beautiful," I whispered. Pam's eyes glistened. "She looks at you like she knows you already," she said. Maybe she did. Maybe every piece of love I'd given away through the years had found its way back here, in this tiny heartbeat against my chest. For a while, no one spoke. The room felt suspended in time, 3 generations bound by silence, forgiveness, and the fragile strength of new beginnings. When I handed Grace back, Pam reached out and touched my hand. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, "and for not giving up on us." I smiled. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for the little one." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "Then we'll make it worth it." I believed her, not because her words were perfect, but because they were human. Later, when I stepped outside, the sun was setting low over the parking lot. The light spilled across the asphalt in gold ribbons. I sat on a bench for a moment, letting it wash over me. The world felt wider, kinder somehow. I thought of all the years I'd spent pouring myself into others, trying to earn a love that was always conditional. I realized I didn't need to earn it anymore. Love had found its own way back to me, not through apology, but through grace itself. That night, back home, I lit the candle on the counter. The flame danced in the glass, casting small waves of light across the kitchen. I took the bracelet from the mantel and fastened it around my wrist. Its silver gleamed softly under the candlelight. I thought of my husband again, of his laughter, his patience, his way of grounding me when the world turned cruel. "She's here, Noel," I whispered. "Our granddaughter. Her name is Grace." The words lingered in the air. I imagined him smiling somewhere unseen, proud as ever. I turned off the lights and walked to the porch. The night sky stretched endless above me, quiet and forgiving. For years, I had believed that strength meant standing tall, unyielding. But now, I knew better. Strength was gentler. It was knowing when to let go, when to forgive, when to rest. I sat down, folding my hands around a cup of tea gone cold. The stars blinked faintly, scattered like fragments of memory. I thought the girl who had once stood outside a wedding hall told to leave, about the silence that followed, about the moment she decided to take back her worth without saying a single cruel word. If I could speak to that woman now, I'd tell her, "You did it. You survived the humiliation. You turned pain into wisdom. You built peace from the ashes of pride." The wind brushed against my face, carrying the scent of blooming roses from the garden. Somewhere in the distance, a newborn cried softly, a reminder that life doesn't stop for sorrow. It renews itself, again and again. I took one last sip, whispered to the quiet night, "This is what grace feels like." Then I smiled, knowing that for once, the story was no longer about what had been taken from me, but about everything I had found. A month passed after Grace's birth. The house felt alive again, filled with sunlight, the scent of blooming flowers, and the quiet hum of peace that had taken years to find. I spent most mornings sitting by the window, knitting a small blanket the color of sky. Each stitch carried something I couldn't say out loud. Patience, forgiveness, memory. One afternoon, Ethan stopped by with Grace in his arms. The baby's eyes were bright and curious, her tiny fingers grasping at the air. "We wanted to visit," he said softly. "She sleeps better in the car anyway." He looked older now, but in a way that made him seem steadier. Pam followed behind him, holding a bouquet of fresh daisies. "For you," she said, setting them on the table. Her voice no longer carried the weight of apology. It carried effort. That was enough. I took Grace into my arms, breathing in that sweet newborn scent. She cooed softly, her eyes wide and unblinking as if the world was something she could already understand. I rocked her gently, humming an old tune my husband used to play on the record player. Ethan sat across from me, watching in silence. "She likes you," he said. "I like her too," I replied. For a while, the three of us said nothing. There was no need. The hurt had settled into history, and what remained was something tender, fragile, and real. When it was time for them to leave, Pam leaned down and kissed my cheek. "We'll see you next week," she said quietly. I nodded, smiling. Next week. When the door closed behind them, the house was still again, but not empty. The echoes that used to haunt it had turned into a calm rhythm, like the tide returning to shore. I placed the daisies in a vase beside the old photograph of my husband. His smile seemed a little warmer now. That evening, I took a walk through the garden. The sky was painted in streaks of pink and gold, the air soft and cool. The roses were in full bloom, heavy with color. I knelt beside one bush, brushing my fingers across the petals. The thorns pricked gently against my skin, a small reminder that even beauty asks for respect. As I stood, I noticed the empty chair at the end of the path, the one my husband used to sit in when the evenings were long and quiet. I walked over and sat down, the wood still strong beneath me. The garden stretched before me like a story finally finished. I closed my eyes and listened. The distant hum of traffic, the chirp of crickets, the faint laughter of neighbors carried on the wind. All ordinary sounds, but each one proof that life goes on. My mind drifted back to that day, the wedding, the sharp sting of humiliation, the moment I chose silence instead of shouting. That silence had once felt like weakness. Now I understood it was power. Power wrapped in dignity, forged through pain and softened by time. I whispered into the dusk, "You see, Noelle?" It all came full circle. The breeze stirred the leaves as if he'd heard me. The porch light flicked on as the sun slipped behind the horizon. I rose slowly, my knees stiff but steady. Inside, the house glowed golden against the coming night. I looked back once before stepping in, letting the last light of day touch my face. Inside, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Grace's blanket lay folded on the table beside me, finished at last. I ran my hand over its soft surface and smiled. Tomorrow I'd bring it to her. Maybe she'd keep it when she was older, maybe she wouldn't, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd know where it came from. The clock ticked softly, each second blending into the next. I thought of all the women like me, the mothers, the wives, the forgotten ones, who gave everything they had and were told it wasn't enough. I wished I could tell them this. You are more than what was taken from you. You are the quiet after the storm, the calm in your own house, the peace no one can strip away. Outside, the moon climbed higher, silvering the edges of the garden. I lifted my cup in a small toast to the night. To the ones who stayed kind, I whispered, and to the ones who learned to start over. The warmth of the tea spread through my chest as I took a final sip. The air smelled of daisies, of new beginnings, of stories that had found their ending. And as the candle on the counter burned low, I smiled, because for the first time there was nothing left to fix, nothing left to prove. Only peace. Only grace.